by the time they were 3. You just go and do it, and get the audiobooks, and get preschools and the schools engaged in fun games, the Big Book of Alpha Tales, and just worksheets and colors and make it fun and saying, okay, a high school student that doesn't want to go to high school, there are lots of K through 12 public internet programs that students can take classes online or supplement online. There's udacity.com, and an adult learning in a public school. We could offer vocational training. The school system is already working with the city, and Superintendent Bork is working on expanding. Instead of our kids going to J. Everett Light, let's keep those dollars here. Ivy Tech has a portion, 60,000 square feet for us for adult learning in Noblesville.
Thank you, Mrs. Scherer. Mr. Harness.
With early childhood learning, it is important to reach out to the younger students and get them involved in how our school district educates. If they in ensuring that the preschooler coming in and the preschool understands how the classroom works and prepare them for that. A high school student who isn't going to college would expand that program as well to enable options for them, enable them to see what they can do with that level of training, and with adult learning, expanding some programs to maybe utilize our schools to do those things.
Thank you, Mr. Harness. Mr. Stevenson.
My first response would be funding, funding, funding. We do know preschool is very important for our kids starting kindergarten to have the skills that they need educational. We don't want them to start kindergarten behind. But as we know, our governor refused to take about $80 million for preschool funding. So we need to find a way to get the funding that we would need to provide that to our students. That's number one for early education. Number two, for non-traditional students, our objective should be for all of our students who graduate from both of our high schools to make sure they are prepared to either go to college or have a smooth transition into their career. We have 2 beautiful college and career academies that we have built on both of our high schools. We need to utilize those to have more vocational training for those non-traditional students. And then in addition to that, we can use those same facilities in the evening for some of our adult learners in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Mrs. Wright.
Well, to address the preschools and daycares, I think that we need to, our administration or someone in administration needs to be in contact with the preschool directors to let them know what's expected of kindergarten these days, because kindergarten is the real deal. It's not fun and games anymore. Kids are learning a ton in kindergarten. So I think it's just getting those preschools prepared so they can work on their preschool students to prepare them. For non-traditional high school students, of course, we have the J. Ever Light Center that we have a connection with. We are now doing the healthcare opportunities here, and I know that the superintendents from Hamilton County have gotten together and talked about putting together a career vocational center here in Hamilton County. I think that's awesome. If we could connect with internships, that leads to jobs. I speak from experience that my husband's dental assistant's been with him 18 years, came straight out of high school from the Walker Career Center at Warren Central. And I think that the college career academies are definitely a place that we could integrate adult learning there as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Moving now to Mrs. Scheffler.
I would concur with a lot of my colleagues up here, and the whole idea of funding for preschool is not mandated by the state, and neither is kindergarten, and we are really hurting budget-wise, even with just the kindergarten. So I would encourage the families, very similarly as was said earlier, to have your child, if you can, be at home, and I'm an advocate of, as much as possible, family time with those very, very young, and I'm thinking 3- and 4-year-olds. And so anytime we can partner, though, with those private preschools in the area, because there are people who are using them, and make people aware required as far as for kindergarten would be good. Also for our non-college bound students, go ahead and have that vocational training, and also doing things here during their high school career that they can make use of, whether it's in the horticultural classes, the ag classes, or in the Project Lead the Way in engineering, and also with this whole idea of using the college career for the adults is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shepley. Mr. Whalen?
Thank you. So I will start off by saying I'm not an educator by trade. I'm a banker. And so when Howard said funding, 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 that's right to my heart. So, absolutely. So preschools, Ms. Wright mentioned reaching out to coordinate curriculum. I think that would be important. But again, if there's a way that we can find support from the state government to bring in those federal dollars for preschool, that would be great. Non-traditional high school, you've all heard about the potential Ivy Tech thing going on here in Hamilton County. I would say my slant on that is let's get the local businesses involved and get them to help fund some of the either machinery or technology that's needed here so they can directly relate to what's going on. And then as far as adult learning, obviously for people either wanting continuing education or their GED, that can be done at the college and career academies.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Mr. Vaughn?
So at the risk of losing a vote, I'm going to give credit to Mr. Stevenson on one of his previous answers about saying, not to be presumptuous and know that you have all the answers. So I certainly don't have all the answers in these areas. However, for early childhood, I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to go home and ask my lovely wife, who is a teacher of 15 years, a special education administrator, who's actually currently the early childhood coordinator for Indianapolis Public Schools. So she goes around all day and partners with preschools and figures out how to transition those kids into classrooms. So I have a resource there. But beyond what she knows too, there are national and state standards for what kids should be doing and learning in preschools to prepare them for kindergarten. So I think we should leverage those in partnering with our local communities until the funding is available to offer it ourselves. I think in terms of adult learning, that's a win-win. If we have facilities in the evenings or in the summers or during breaks, we also have teachers who know how to teach and might want to get extra money. There's no reason that we can't put adult learning programs in our facilities. And in terms of non-traditional students, I think we just need to expand those community partnerships and provide those apprenticeships and internships to those students so that they can go straight into the workforce.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Jones?
A lot of great comments have already been said. I'm married to a teacher. My wife taught for 10 years at the elementary level, including kindergarten. So the lack of funding at the kindergarten level is a topic that's come up in our household a lot. So when we go to the preschool, and that, it's the same thing. Without funding, we've only got so much money. But we can work with preschools. We can communicate. We can let them know what the expectations are. Just like we can let them know that, hey, when you get to kindergarten, you're also going to be using a computer, which I don't think we've done a great job of. So I think that's a communication effort. Beyond that, it's the funding thing. At the high school, I'm with everybody. I'm supporting a career academy within Hamilton County. I think that is a great move. I also think we need to put opportunities in our high schools to make sure kids are getting exposed to a wide range of things so that they're aware of what their opportunities are. Because a lot of kids don't know everything they can do. I was at a give camp where we were training people where a kid for the first time saw that their guy was working on a computer and he's like, can you get paid to do that? And it's like, yes, you can. So that kid realized, and granted he was from the inner city of Indianapolis, that there are other opportunities out there. We need to make sure our kids are seeing all of those opportunities.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Everett?
I got nothing. Every suggestion and idea has been brought up. It's fantastic. Our kids all were the products of preschool, whether it be an in-home setting or a daycare setting. I think a partnership with the preschools in the area, the daycares, along with the schools, I think would benefit everybody so the parents of those preschool students could know what to kind of expect as their kids move into kindergarten, into the school district, for first-time parents especially. Moving on to non-traditional students, I was the product of a career center in my high school. I can't tell you how beneficial it was to me, but how much benefit I saw other students and friends that I went to school with benefit from it as well. So I'm a big believer and a really strong proponent of the career center for our school district. And finally, and tying in with that, as far as adult education goes, that career center in Warren Township when I was there was busy 5 nights a week, all evening long with classes for adults and programs for them as well. But all great answers from all the candidates, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. The first, next question is going to go to Mr. Bronner first, so we can, you know, like my fifth question, maybe I'll get the microphone thing right here, give a heads up 7-up on it. Going to combine a couple of questions. Wanted to know, this generation of students with No Child Left Behind is, you know, some people say No Child Left Untested. And so what is your opinion of standardized testing, which typically is done for English and math and sometimes science? And then balancing that, what's your position on the arts and the impact on our students? So standardized testing on one hand versus the arts and the impact on our students on the other. And so, Mr. Bonner, if you're up first.
Sure. I'll start with the arts. Sitting next to Frank, who mentioned that he's a big supporter of the arts. I'll let you know that I'm a longtime band performer, marching band. My wife's a longtime choir performer. The arts are a huge part of our lives. And not only do I think are they critical for rounding out our students' education and providing creative outlets, research shows that people involved thoroughly in the arts perform better on the core subjects as well. It engages other parts of their brains and allows them to translate that learning in the arts over into other subjects. So that's tremendous. I would say in terms of testing, to some extent we're at the mercy of the state and whatever they dictate that we have to do. The reason that we have widespread state testing is, of course, because of No Child Left Behind, but also because a standardized test with multiple choice answers is the most efficient way to create a standard benchmark across students. Is it perfect or is it even good? You know, maybe not. You can argue against that, but when people are looking to measure schools, they have to have something there. So there's going to have to be some sort of assessment, but would I enjoy reducing that? Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Bonner. Going next to Mr. Jones.
Standardized testing, I have written my senator many times about the ISTEP. The ISTEP was a great idea for seeing where our kids are so we know how to place them in the next year. Then we threw some other things in there like grading teachers in schools, which is a completely different kind of thing. If we're going to do standardized testing, we got to know what its purpose is. It has to be a singular purpose that can succeed, and we can't put a bunch of other stuff in. We can't help our kids to be positioned correctly and grade our schools in the same way. It just doesn't work, as we've seen. So if the next ISTEP that comes out is just a reiteration of ISTEP, then the board's going to have a challenge to continue to face the state. As far as the arts, I concur with everybody. I mean, I believe band, music, the arts, PE, all of those things, a well-rounded kid is what we want. Again, because the more exposure we give them to more different things, the better choices they'll be able to make when they step outside of our school, then the better they're going to be able to enjoy life and to do what they need to do. So totally believe that we can't invest, there's not too much that we could invest in the arts and those whole programs.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Harness.
Yes, on generic testing, I do agree we need to separate that. It needs to not be a teacher evaluation product. I'm not entirely sure exactly what that looks like tonight, but I think that we need to separate that and truly have it be what it is used for. As far as the arts, well, thinking back to when I was in school, I was in band, and I picked up playing drums. I was doing that, I kind of stopped, but that was a big part of my teenage years. And I think that really helped shape me as a person moving forward. So I think moving forward, we need to ensure that that's still is part of the learning process for the students.
Thank you, Mr. Harness. Mr. Stevenson.
I'll start with the arts. I played alto saxophone for 4 years in high school, and I think my wife says I still play at the 8th grade level. But I still believe that the arts, there is a correlation with students succeeding in the classroom and them being involved involved with arts and athletics, it's to make them a full-rounded student. And colleges do want to see that our kids are multi-dimensional and multi-talented and also able to succeed in the classroom at the same time. Secondly, regarding No Child Left Behind, we do know the national Every Child Succeed Act replaced No Child Left Behind, but we do know standardized testing is not the only factor to determine if a kid is performing well in the classroom. We do know some of our students don't perform well on standardized testing, so it's my hope that the 24-member panel that we have in Indiana that is looking at the ISTEP test will come up with some type of other factors that we can conclude to look at our students' evaluation.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Mr. Everett.
Just echoing on the arts what Mr. Stevenson said, I was also in a band in high school, and having that full-rounded education allowed me to experience so much more. I felt like a more complete student because of that as I went forward into college. Even though I didn't continue with the band in college, I felt I had been exposed to something special there. And I'm a big believer in the arts, and I'm pleased to see that we have such an active arts community here in our schools. As far as the testing goes, I had a conversation with the superintendent a few weeks ago, and we both in agreement said that the students spend way too much time testing. The teachers spending way too much time administering tests. I have to believe, and I hope Mr. Stevenson's right for the new state panel, that they can come up with a plan that we can assess our students' learning in the classroom a lot better way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. Mrs. Shepler.
As far as the arts, I'm going to go to my pattern here with the my colleagues again, is that it's not just instruments. It could be voice, it could be drama, it could be arts where it's the fine arts with drawing or sculpting or any of those kind of, those all indeed help a person, especially who has not had success in other areas, to succeed, and also would be a good way of supporting their other parts of their education. So I believe strongly in having good arts for the kids. Also, on the standardized testing, I feel that testing should be a means of seeing where a student is and what needs to be done to make improvements in a particular subject area. And standardized testing should be shorter, it shouldn't be so costly, the results should come back sooner, and I concur with Mr. Stevenson about having a panel come down with a much better plan for us in having our kids to be tested. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shepler. Mr. Whalen.
So whoever asked about the arts, thank you. So obviously near and dear to my heart, all three of my children are actively engaged in the arts. My older two, particularly so, both in music, theater, dance. I've been involved with the Indianapolis Symphonic Choir for over 10 years on their board and just rotated off. So it is definitely something near and dear to my heart. In the schools, benefits of art, obviously creative thinking, nonverbal communication, helps students focus, perseverance, problem solving, a number of benefits that haven't been mentioned here. Funding for the arts has not been increased in the past 7 years in our school district. So that needs to be looked at. Standardized testing, I will echo what everyone has said here. There does need to be a benchmark and standard set, but as far as evaluating our teachers based on that, I am definitely not in support of that.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Mrs. Wright.
Quickly on the arts, I echo what everyone else has said, but it's not that math can't be creative, but drama, singing, drawing, painting, all of that is extremely creative, and it's just a different outlet for students, a different way of thinking. As far as standardized testing, I'm not a big fan of the ISTEP. Obviously, it's a state requirement, but I personally prefer the NWEA, and that's because feedback is immediate. I've told the story to the superintendent, I've told it to several people before. daughter as a kindergartner came home proud as punch because she was, I don't remember the exact numbers, say she was trying to score a 200 on her NWEA, and she scored a 205, and she knew she had exceeded her goal. How awesome is that? My junior high student hasn't received his I-STEP scores from the test he took in February and April. Does he care? Honestly, no, and he's a good student.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Wright. Mrs. Scherer?
I get to go last this time. Okay, let's take the easy one first, the arts. I don't think we need to pick arts or standardized testing. Let's take that 50 to 60 hours of testing. I mean, we have 9-week assessments, and we have 40 hours of testing in the spring. We could spread that out over some arts and use that testing money. My kids have gotten in a mismatch with the testing that they're in +2 and +1 math advanced, and then the test that they take doesn't match up. So the test sometimes, when the test is on geometry was 2 years ago. So I would say there's a mismatch. I think we also need to look at what is College Board expecting. We're sort of guessing what are we going to test these kids on, and we change it as soon as it gets implemented. College Board wants something else. Like the SAT now has very little geometry and a lot of statistics. But we don't offer statistics until the kids are seniors. So I would say if we're going to do the testing, why don't we find out what's the next step that they're expected to achieve and back up from that and be proactive. And my kids play piano.
Thank you, Mrs. Scherer. Our next question will go to Mr. Everett first. I'm combining 2 questions again. Won't this be fun? Yes. As a board member, you have to deal with board policy. Would you support changing language in board policy to include sexual orientation? And going along with that, the second part of the question is, as a board member, you hire the employees for the district. That's your responsibility. You approve the hiring of them. How would you promote a more diverse staff? So the 2 parts of the question is, would you support changing the board policy language to include sexual orientation? And the second part is, as a board member, how would you promote hiring a more diverse staff? And Mr. Everett, you're up first.
Well, the first part of your question, I think that decision is going to kind of be made for us because of federal laws that are in the process of coming down, where the school district will have to adjust its discrimination policy to include all races, sexual orientations. So part of that is going to be made for us, but it would be my hope that when that does happen, that we will get together as a community, administrators, board members, teachers, parents, all staff, and we come to agreement and have a great policy in place that we maybe not all agree on all parts of it. We have a strong consensus one way or another. As far as the board hiring, I didn't quite, the second part of the question has to do with,
How would you go about retaining and, attracting a more diverse staff?
I think that goes, human resources in the hiring process, making sure that the community around HSE and prospective employees know that we do have an open door policy and that essentially all are welcome, and we would be happy to accept potential employees from all walks of life.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Everett. Microphone's coming down this way for Mrs. Wright.
Well, what Mr. Everett said, I would agree with. I mean, I know that there are some federal mandates that are in talks and that are coming about the sexual orientation. Personally, I think that we need to protect those students. If we're talking about transgender students, then obviously I'm supportive of those students. But I do think that it's important that they use the restroom not necessarily with how they identify themselves. And I think we do that for the protection of all students, because if students always made the right choice, adults for that matter too, we wouldn't have all this education on anti-bullying. Obviously, all adults have to do it before we can volunteer in the school system. I know at the junior high, we spend $1,000, which is 10% of our budget, on an anti-bullying convocation once a year. So it's a big, big issue. So it's just for the protection of all students involved. As far as promoting promoting a more diverse hiring. I think you just have human resources. I mean, we do have some diversity in our area, and I think we just promote whatever opportunities are available to the entire community.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Mr. Whalen?
Well, obviously with the federal mandates coming down, we're not going to have a lot of choice. I would certainly support conversations amongst the community to reach the consensus so we don't have the issue that our governor had recently with the tourism industry here in Fishers. We certainly want to make sure that everyone's going forward together on everything. Now, as far as recruiting, we would need to really, and I think it's extremely important because having a diverse teaching staff helps give our students different experiences, different opportunities to experience different backgrounds. And so we would need to focus on actively recruiting to that. So I'm not sure exactly what our HR policies are for that, but certainly should be targeted that way.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Mrs. Scherer?
Okay, we are required to follow federal mandates, and I've spoken with board members who have already conferred with the corporation attorneys that as those federal mandates are passed down, then we as a public institution will follow those. Regarding diversity, I agree with Mr. Whalen. If my husband works for Ernst & Young, if they feel that a particular university is strong in an area, they go to that college and recruit. So if we want to attract more diversity, maybe we need to be recruiting at particular colleges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scherer. Mr. Harness?
Yes, as mentioned, there are federal mandates that we're going to have to follow. It's kind of a side note, I think, overall, to be careful that we're just protecting students. We're not protecting this student group or that student group. It's just students. So as we move forward, we can make sure that our policies provide that moving forward. With diversity, definitely we need to provide the environment, make it known that we provide 100% open hiring practices.
Thank you, Mr. Harness. Mr. Stevenson?
Right, I got more than a minute for this.
No. You may not.
One, as our district becomes more diverse, it's very important that we be diverse with our teachers. When I became a member of the school board, that was one of the board policies that I wanted to implement, and we did implement that we're going to increase the number of minority teachers in our district. We have about 77% white students in our district, about 9% are African American, about 6 are Hispanic, and about 6 are Asian. However, about 99% of our teachers are white, and less than 1% are African American, and all the other categories are less than that. We need to go where those candidates are. So we need to go to historically black colleges and universities, and go to universities that have black student unions and ask, where are your teachers who are being educated in the area of education? So we need to really do that if we're going to reach all of our kids. Secondly, as a public school district, we are charged to educate all of the students that come through our doors regardless of their sexual orientation. So we need to have policies that protect them. However, we have to safeguard that to make sure that we are not running afoul of federal and state legislation, so we don't have any anticipated consequences as it relates to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Mrs. Scheffler?
Well, I just want all to understand that I am also in favor of equal treatment and respect for all students and staff. And I know that we have policies already for bad behavior. You don't do that. And it's reflected in all those policies we have and handbooks. I think though, and I believe, that the issue of the LGBT is very complex and it is being debated even at the higher levels, state and federal. And I think if we jumped to a policy right now to put sexual orientation might be a little bit too early. I think we need to wait and see, and it usually comes from the state because the federal would just, it has strings of money attached. And doesn't mean we have to, by this point, just because of the money. So the other thing about hiring employees that are diverse, and I would concur with Mr. Stevenson, we need to encourage our administrators to go to colleges and to other locations where they can find these individuals and encourage them to and look into education as a means of their career.
Thank you, Mrs. Sheckler. Mr. Baldorf?
I am anti-discrimination, period. I think our school board should have a strong and consistent anti-discrimination, non-discrimination policy. That said, as all of you that are in the classrooms and in the buildings know, it's all about who's implementing the policy and execution on the ground. So we can create as a board whatever policy we want, but if our administrators and teachers don't know how to apply that consistently, our students can go into one class or one situation and be in a situation where they're accused of bullying or discrimination and go to another one where it's not. So we have to define that a little more clearly. The other thing we have to be cautious of is if we are too gray in how we define that, we eliminate opportunities for critical thinking. Okay, so we have to be able to look at other religions in the world and be able to have discussions about them without people thinking it's bullying. We have to have discussions about at-risk groups or certain types of behaviors that may cause other things. So we have to open that up for discussion without it being considering bullying, or we're doing a disservice to our children.
Thank you, Mr. Baldorf. Mr. Jones?
I think a lot's already been said on the discrimination side. I agree, there are federal laws, there are standards we're going to have to meet and incorporate in. My stance is the same. We should not discriminate against anybody for any reason. And I think we're pretty lucky in our district that it's not a huge issue. And I know when this came up in the board over the summer, I believe the answer was, it's not, a big, huge issue where we're having people filing charges. But we still need the policy. We need to understand the policy. We need to educate everybody on the policy. As far as the diversity side, I looked at the statistics and I was surprised that I saw 3% of our staff falls into the minority group. And I truly was surprised. I would have guessed a lot higher than that. I think it comes down to we've got to set it up to where we hire teachers. We have a compensation package that's competitive, that we're making it engaging for our teachers who want to teach here. I think if we make it where any teacher wants to be here, then we will get the candidates across the spectrum of race or whatever. I mean, to me, it's more about the qualifications, but we need to make it engaging where we get the people that want the jobs here and that want to stay here.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Okay, so I've got 3 questions in my hand. I bet we can do it. So this questioner wants to know your opinion of whether or not you prefer a balanced calendar. So that's one question. Another question is, how do you see yourself as a role of a board member? And the third one is, what can be done to eliminate the need for teachers to spend so much of their own money in their classroom? So let's put these together here. So your support or dismay with a balanced calendar, and you can define that how you want to define it. Lots of different definitions out there. Your role as a board member, how do you perceive what your role would be? And then lastly, concern about teachers spending a lot of money, their own money, to transform their classrooms. So our first respondee is Mrs. Wright, excuse me.
Okay, balanced calendar. When the parent survey came out at the end of last year, I personally voted for the balanced calendar, which I guess would be there's lots of definitions of it. I equate it to the week at fall break and the week at spring break. I just think that from a parent perspective and someone who's in the classroom a lot and the teachers are ready for a break, more than just 1 or 2 days and the students are ready for a break. So I welcome that change. Role of a board member. Obviously, I'm running under Wayne as a representative for Wayne Township. I sometimes feel like Wayne Township's a little bit forgotten because we're all the way up there at Durbin. We're the only school that sits in Wayne Township. But I will list, obviously, I'm representing the entire school district as well, and you're all voting for a representative from Wayne Township as well. So I am very collaborative. I have lots of friends, both PTO and parent friends. I will listen and try to make the best decisions possible for our students first, because that's really why we're here. And teachers and their own money. Well, that falls right into my PTO roles and responsibilities. I think it's very important that we have allotments for teachers that we give them, because I know they do spend so much money. At Durbin, one thing that we have implemented in the last 3 years is PTO grants, so for teachers to be able to think outside the box. And outside of big foundation grants, but these are smaller grants that really we want to collaborate. The teachers collaborate with each other, work as teams, and do it as teams. But we try to support our teachers in any way we can, because I know that they dump a lot of their own personal money into their profession.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Mr. Stevenson.
As I understand a balanced calendar, my definition would be that it substitutes a traditional long summer break for longer spring and fall breaks. I'm in favor of that to allow students to retain the information that they have learned, and there's not a long gap period of time. But I want to make sure that in the balanced calendar that we make sure we have adequate instructional time for all of our students. We have sufficient time for teacher development, and then also that we will ensure that we have parent involvement as it relates to daycare needs that they would have as it relates to changing from our traditional calendar. Secondly, as a board member, as a current board member, my objective is to make sure whatever ruling, whatever vote that I cast, I ask myself, is this in the best interest of our students? And if the answer is yes, my vote is yes as it relates to that. I believe I've had the proper temperament to work with my colleagues on the board, and they have saw fit to make me vice president and put me in leadership roles as a board member. Secondly, I think teachers spending their own money, as a wife who's teaching in the district for 16 years, that has significantly impacted our bank account. I think with the referendum passing, we can look at things that we can offset that to give more additional funding for our teachers to not have to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Mr. Jones.
As far as balanced calendar, I mean, I would like a balanced calendar, but to me, that is one that's going to be based on what works for the community, for the teachers, for everybody around, and what works based on what research says is best for the kids. So that's one that I think there are stats and numbers out there that can help us determine the right answer. And the survey was done, and I think the school's executed based on that, and it's working towards what the community's at least chimed in. As far as board member and what I expected as a board member, my understanding is we as a board are here to set policy and procedures to help the administrators, the teachers, the people in the schools be able to be effective at teaching our kids and getting our kids where they need to be. We're here to help remove the blocks, the milestone, or the blocks, the impediments that are in their way so that they can do what they need to do. So they're not worrying about, is there copy or paper that I can use, or is it the end of the month? And in that regard, you know, my wife was an elementary teacher for 10 years. I think our income was better when she quit or when she stepped down to have kids than it was during those 10 years, because it was expensive. I mean, and there are a lot of other things teachers want, and we do need to work some of that into the budget, particularly as we do things like HSEA 21, where there are a lot of programs that require a lot of unique things. And at RSI Intermediate, we're setting up the grants as well. We're working $6,000 into our PTO budget that will hopefully get approved this week or next, so that the teachers can come up with those programs, whether it's, you know, working with Spiros or coming up with something unique that takes some extra things so that they don't have to spend their own money. I mean, you guys aren't paid enough, or the teachers aren't paid enough regardless, so we're doing what we can.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Bordeaux.
Thank you. In terms of the balanced calendar, I'll echo what Brad just said, in that there is research out there that shows the benefits of how balanced calendars can help students in terms of their health and education, help teachers recharge their instruction. So I think we need to balance the decision on the calendar with the available research and with the community needs. In terms of how I'd see myself as a board member, I'd like to think that I offer some additional leadership in terms of curriculum and education based on my experience both in the classroom and as a technology leader in the state of Indiana and in another school district. I think I can support the curriculum department in furthering the HSE 21 vision and helping teachers succeed in that manner. And I have a long history of developing partnerships to do those types of things. And lastly, a teacher spending their own money. As a former teacher and as my wife also being a teacher, we fill that out in our tax returns every single year, right off that $250, and that was only a fraction of what we spent. I think we do need to look at ways to cover those costs or provide those materials, but it's going to just require some additional scrutiny on the line items in the budget.
Thank you very much. Going now to Mr. Everett.
Balanced calendar, interesting topic. I had strong feelings about this until the school district passed the new calendar 2 school board meetings ago, giving us that week-long fall break. I'm not necessarily opposed to a balanced calendar. However, I want to ensure that the school district would verify and check with YMCA, other local agencies, that there would be childcare and camps available for these kids whose parents both work outside the home, who could not take those 2 weeks off to be at home with them. So I want to make sure, before we moved on that, to make sure there is enough resources available for those parents if we went to a balanced calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. Mrs. Shara.
Okay, I want it noted, I have not gotten the stuff yet. Okay, on the balanced calendar, this was already voted in, and the shift was just taking 3 days from Christmas and putting it into October, which as a parent of a fall sports kid, I can't utilize. But it was just a 3-day shift, so I didn't see that as significant. And the way Christmas falls this year is the first time it has fallen in 9 years. So I think that's why they jumped on it for this next school year. It'll work out to get that full week off before Christmas still. My concern is that finals end on Wednesday, which means we're going to have Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday finals. And that weekend for high school kids is just hard to have that gap. My role on the board, I would hope, I would be a CPA on the board. I don't think we've had an accountant on the board in a while or ever that I can find, and I would like to work with Mr. Reuter utilizing those new referendum dollars efficiently. And I would hope that with the referendum passing, and I know my kids have a 0 paper policy in their classes. If something needs printed, you print it at home, that we could take some of those office supplies and move those over to the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shara. Mr. Harness.
I'll start with my role as a board member. I want to really facilitate communication and reaching out in all the areas that we need to reach out into. And also asking the questions as things come up. I think, in general, the role of the board member is to rely on the staff to present the options to do their job. The role of the board member is then to ask the questions as they come in to make sure that everything has been thought of. And as far as teachers having to pay for items, I think we need to maybe look at how we can utilize multi-year products and items so we can then stretch that out over years and maybe add some funding for the budget that way, and then not just continually spending the same money every year. I'm sorry, I completely forgot the first question.
Balance calendar.
Yes, the balance. Thank you. The balance, I think we need to look at the calendar every year. I know that that's always something that's never going to please everybody, so I think we need to continue to adjust and continue making the little tweaks every single year.
Thank you, Mr.
Keep
Harness.
it the same
I'm sorry.
when we can. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. I apologize. Mr. Wayland.
So first, with the balanced calendar, I'm in favor of the balanced calendar. Teacher supply money, I feel like a teachers unfairly have been asked to continually provide supplies at their own expense during the cost-cutting issues that have gone on over the past 7+ years. So I think it's only fair to put something back in the budget to make that right. And then importantly, role of the board or board member. So the board member is there for oversight. A board member is not there to decide what textbook is used in the classroom. A board member is not there to pick out the paint that's used on a building. If those details are something that the board members are deciding, then the administration isn't doing what it should be doing. So, and I know that Dr. Borf would love to take full control of all of those issues. Role of board members also to be collaborative with the city and other entities, and to be an advocate for the schools and school funding with the teachers, the state, and the politicians going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Mrs. Shepler.
What's interesting about the balanced calendar question is that a number of years ago, the school district did look at balanced calendar, and we had it along with the regular calendar, and it was very expensive to run both of them, and there was a large community outcry, let's go back to one. So when we surveyed the community, they wanted to go back to the quote-unquote traditional calendar. Things might be changing now. Community may be changing with their own personal needs. And so a balanced calendar may be something that be part of the thing that we go to. And personally, I don't care for it, but I don't have a skin in the game on this one. As far as having students in the classroom, my own, I've got grandkids, but not my own kids. The other thing is that the role of the school board member is that the understanding that I'm only one, or any one of us is only one out of 7. And we have no authority except as a group to make decisions. And that's one of our big roles, is a decision maker, and we also would hire the superintendent. So we need to speak with one voice. And we usually speak with the board president on there's some issues that might be out there. We need to realize too that the authority is only given to us as a group and not as individuals. The teacher money that we have for classrooms, trustfully, we have that referendum money has provided a means to use more of that money instead of their own personal, as well as the PTO and the foundation can provide some of that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shepler. Okay, we're going to move to closing statements next, and we're going to go down the line here to make it easier for microphone, in reverse order of what the opening was. I also want to share with you, candidates, some questions I wasn't able to ask tonight because of time. So one questioner wants to know about how would you change communication between the public and the board. Another one was concerned about that most bills are unanimous on the board, and what does that mean? About the meetings not being very public, they're held in public, but that they're not videotaped or they're not electronically available. 3 action verbs to describe yourself as a board member. That's a fun one. Thoughts on class size at the junior high and high school level, because the referendum really didn't address those issues. Your opinion or thoughts on use of public funds for private schools. And lastly, your ideal superintendent. So the good news is, I'm not combining those questions. That's the good news, but those are some of the questions that audience members have that we weren't able to get to tonight. So before we go to closing statements, I want to thank all the people in the audience, of course, for being here. And I also want to thank Mary Armstrong, our auditorium director, and her assistant Alexa up there in the booth for helping us with sound and various other events this evening. Also, I want to give a shout out to Kelly Haynes for organizing this event. And of course, so at this time, we'll move to closing statements, and we'll clap for everyone at the end. 1 minute. Mrs. Wright.
just like to conclude by saying thank you for having this forum. It's great that we can be informed on something that's not the top of everyone's ballot this year. I think President is obviously taking the limelight. But I just want to reiterate that I do have 3 students in the school system, so I am completely invested. I have an 8th grader, a 6th grader, a 3rd grader. I've been involved in PTOs for years. I feel like I have a very good understanding of the classroom, having been in it volunteering at all grade levels for a long time. Understanding of PTOs and how they work with schools. I have a terrific relationship with our principal, so I understand how a school runs as a whole, and having a good relationship with Dr. Borf and running through the referendum, working with the executive committee, have a good understanding of how the school system as a whole works. So I would like to just put all that to work. As I said, I'm not an educator, but I have a real passion for our schools. I have a real love of Hamilton Southeastern, and I will do my best to work and make the best decisions for the students and the teachers, because in my mind, they go hand in hand moving forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Mrs. Scheffler.
Thank you again for being here, and I just wanted to reiterate as well that I have been in the school district for over 35 years and been on the board now for 16. And because of that perspective of having that historical viewpoint of being on the board, there are some things that new members or the ones who have just been on for a short period of time may not know or and I don't want to lose that. That's important perspective of the history. I do think we have the issues of growth, we have the changing demographics, the safety and security of the students. We have all these things with the calendar or the schedules to consider, and I would believe that with the experiences underneath the belt with working with colleagues in the past, that I can be best suited for continuing in this role as school board member.
Thank you, Mrs. Scheffler. And those are our 2 candidates from Wayne Township. Now moving to Fall Creek, Mr. Stevenson.
Thanks again for the opportunity to be here. I would say, first of all, I'm a proven commodity. I am currently the vice president of the school board, and since my tenure on the board, we have dealt with redistricting, we've dealt with HSE 21, we've dealt with the iPad rollout, and we've dealt with the referendum. And I have had an integral part in that whole process. One of the questions we were unable to answer was, what is our ideal superintendent? Well, I'll answer that for you. I was on the subcommittee that recommended Dr. Alan Borf to our general school board. I was honored to recommend Dr. Alan Borf. I think he's doing an excellent job, and he would be my ideal superintendent for where we are for HSE schools at this current point. I would say, lastly, we've had a lot of successes since I've been on the board. The last 2 years, HSE Schools has more 4-star schools in the state of Indiana, more than any other district. And Geis Elementary is now a blue ribbon school throughout the country. So I want to continue what I'm doing on the board, and thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Mr. Everett.
Thank you again, Janet, for everyone attending tonight. It was a privilege to be able to be part of this forum. I've never done anything like this before, and it was a learning experience, to say the least. I would love to be a member of the school board representing Fall Creek Township. I'd like to bring my common sense business approach, and I feel that would be a great asset to the school board. I am also fully vested in this school district with 2 kids already in it and 1 getting ready to start. I love Fishers, and I love HSE, and I would be honored to be a member of the board going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Everett. Mr. Broderick.
Thank you. As with the other candidates, I'm honored to be here. I'll close out by giving you my pitch for being on the school board. I think I bring a unique perspective through my breadth of experience, both teaching in the classroom, in urban magnet schools, and in suburban districts like this one. Also, my experience working on the Department of Education and Assessment and Accountability, and understanding both the value of the research options available through that data, but also how it impacts classroom instruction. And also through my participation in the rollout of HSE 21, the deployment of one-to-one devices here at our school district, and also doing that in my current job with another school district. I can bring a unique perspective and help us avoid some of the mistakes made either here or elsewhere as we go forward. I'd like to serve on the board to help teachers have an opportunity to unleash their talents. We have an opportunity here with a wealth of resources to really innovate in the classroom and take that next step rather than just doing the rote teaching and the rote schedules that we've always seen in the past. So I hope you'll consider that as you decide to vote this fall.
Thank you, Mr. Boroff. That concludes our Fall Creek Township candidates. Now for Delaware Township, Mr. Whalen.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you all again for being here, and thank you to the candidates for all being here as well. You know, as I said, the school district is a vital part of our community, and I see this as a unique opportunity going forward for me to use my 18 years experience in banking, both in commercial lending, financial analysis, budgeting and managing to a budget, 10 years of board experience on nonprofit boards, to help push forward an agenda that is going to help us with, creative teaching and learning, becoming an employer of choice, and supporting the arts and being transparent in all of our financial dealings. I would appreciate your support and your vote on November 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Whalen. Mrs. Shara.
Thank you. Thank you to the board for having the forum this evening, and thank you to all of you for coming. I believe local elections are important, and school board is the most important, and I wish that the room was filled. As my teachers, mentors, and guidance counselor, Mrs. Ballow, poured into me, I want to instill in students, staff, and teachers a direct future and hope for them. I am running in honor of my guidance counselor, whose daughter is sitting right back in the back tonight. She was able to come, and her mother was the reason for all my successes in life, and when she passed, her daughter gave me this coffee cup that was on her desk at work, and I am running to honor Mrs. Ballow and hope that I can contribute as an accountant on the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shara. Mr. Jones.
60-second answers to the type of questions we've been answering tonight doesn't work. I mean, there are lots of big issues, and a few of you have talked to me, and I can talk for hours on all these topics. I haven't really talked about my background. I've been an associate publisher at Pearson, which many of you are probably familiar with. I'm a director at my current company. I got promoted not because I'm a good speaker or was always tactful, but because I asked the questions, I dig in, I look for the answers of what we're doing. So when the state changes our funding, I look to say, what are those numbers? I dig, I talk to the senator. I find out that we get $9 million more this year from the state that we didn't have 2 years ago, on top of our referendum dollars, on top of the $10 million bond we did this summer, on top of the $5 million that we just approved at the last meeting by saving interest. I look at those numbers and I analyze them, and I try to figure out what's the best way to use that money for our kids, what's the focus on our kids. I'll write on my website, jones123.com/HSE. I'll be posting out there some of the stuff that I think about, some of the topics I think are important, so you can go there and look. You can ask the principals, the teachers that my kids go to, ask them about me, say, is this somebody we want or don't want? I would say use that as a milestone as to who you pick, and whether they think we will represent you, our kids, and everybody else.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Harness.
In running for the board, I want to really make sure that as someone who has an 8-year-old, it's just a 6-year-old and 1-year-old, that the young family approach still is represented. I think that's something that people spend more time on the board, and when people are there, they kind of lose some of that touch with what does a first grader need, what does that look like moving forward, and also just overall communication. While I myself, I'm not an actual, I can't voice board opinions, I can at least be a conduit to the community to be able to ask questions, be able to provide some clarity as though they were at the meeting, as though they saw those things happen. Thank you. I'd like to thank the association for putting this on, and everyone for coming. As you can tell, I'm not most comfortable up here, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harness. Just a reminder, November 8th is voting day, but you can't vote unless you're registered. October 11th is the deadline for registration. Indiana Voter, www.indianavoters.com is where you can go to. Remember